Welcome to the Love for the Game podcast. Here's your host, Reed Napper.
And welcome back to another episode of the Love for the Game podcast. I'm your host, Reed Napper. Thank you for joining us today. It is Friday, August 8th, and we are only 15 days away from the college football season. You know, that's going to be right around the corner. It is fully prediction season. Fall camp has started. Fall camp buzz is at a high right now. You know, injury bugs have taken over teams. You know, who's going to be the starting quarterback for some of these programs. We're going to be talking about all of that today. And in my hands right here, I have my full top 25 preseason rankings and a couple of outsiders, you know, that I think could make a jump into that top 25 based on their early performances within the season. But today, my full preseason top 25 rankings, we'll be getting into that today. But first, I want to thank you guys for all the support you guys have shown so far. I know we've taken a little break from the podcast for a little bit, but I want to thank you guys for your constant support over on Instagram, X, and Twitter at LFTGPod01. I really appreciate all the support. And remember to like, comment, and subscribe on today's video. I want to hear your thoughts and opinions on my top 25 rankings. But before we get into that, one more quick announcement. I want to thank our very first sponsor of the podcast, Squad Blitz. They are a college fantasy football app, and they specialize, you know, it's like traditional fantasy football, but, you know, you're drafting offenses, you know, for their rushing, passing, receiving. You're also drafting defenses, you know, that are specific to teams. You're not drafting specific players. And I want to thank them for being the first sponsor of the podcast. If you go down to the link in the description or look up Squad Blitz on the App Store or the Google Play Store, and you look upon sign up under the referral, like how did you hear about us, and under the referral, and you hit Love for the Game, that would be a huge support for the program. And I really appreciate Squad Blitz for sponsoring today's episode of the podcast. Now, no more time wasted. We are going to get into my preseason top 25 rankings. Now, once again, I want to preface, these are my rankings. These are my opinions. I take everything into consideration, you know, returning production, transfers that have come in, incoming freshmen, the schedule that these teams will have into the 2025 season. Everything is considered into these rankings, you know, and you might not agree with them at first. I will say right off the bat, I do have a lot of sleeper teams that make it into my top 25 and teams, you know, that a lot of people don't have in their initial rankings. But I want to give my love to them, show my support. And, you know, I think there are a lot of underdogs this season. There are a lot of teams that can make some noise, shake up the college football playoff and their conference races. So without further ado, let's get into it. On the outside looking in to begin the season of the Love for the Game preseason top 25, our first outsider team, the SMU Mustangs, coming in with an over-under for all my bettors out there, an over-under win total of 8.5. They're going into their second season in the ACC, you know, finished the first ACC season 11-3, came out of nowhere, made the conference championship game and lost on a 63-yard Hail Mary field goal at the very end against Clemson. So lost that ACC championship game, but we're still good enough based on other teams around them to make the college football playoff, and lost in their first round game at Penn State. But a very first positive season in the ACC under Coach Rhett Lashley. They returned quarterback Kevin Jennings, you know, who's been touted to be in some Heisman conversations for some people coming into this season. So they return him at quarterback. They do lose a lot of offensive production, and their defense is still proven, at least up front, and had the 26th best ranked defense in 2024. So they'll need to have to replicate that success going into this season, but they are still proven on the defensive line. They do need to replace a lot of offensive production, like I said. So that's why I'm a little, you know, worried about having them in the top 25. I have them just on the outside looking in. And they do have a very tough schedule within the ACC, but they do get a lot of those tough games at home. For instance, they're out of conference. They have Baylor and TCU, which are two, you know, very stout teams from the Big 12. No pushovers there. I do have SMU winning both of those games, though. But I do have them marked as a toss-up game. They could go either way, but I do have SMU. I am leaning SMU in both those games. Baylor is at home at TCU. At Clemson, I do have them losing that game in the ACC championship game rematch. I do have them losing at home to Miami in the Rhett Lashlee revenge game of sorts, as he was a former assistant at Miami. And they also host Louisville at home, which will be another contender in the ACC this season. I have that as another toss-up game, but I do have them losing that game as well. And again, I do project them over their win total of, I do have their, lower tier record at 9-3, but I do see them. They potentially could finish at 10-2. Depending how those toss-up games go. Say they flip that Louisville game at home. I could see them finishing with the 10-2 record. Competing for another spot in the college football playoff for sure. But it also depends on those two non-conference games, like I said, against Baylor at home and at TCU. But the biggest question mark for SMU coming into this season is definitely, will they be able to replicate that offensive production that they had in 2024 that they have lost coming into the season. Next team on the outside looking in, the Duke Blue Devils, coming into the 2025 season with an over-under record total of 6.5 wins. Now, some of the marks I have for Duke, they're coming off a 9-win season in year one under head coach Manny Diaz. They added Darian Mensah in the portal at quarterback from Tulane. They returned 4 of their offensive line starters and running back Jaquez Moore, with other multiple dynamic receivers also coming back on the offensive side. And defensively, as if head coach Manny Diaz, former defensive coordinator at numerous stops, so he will be focused more on the defensive side of the ball, but he has built a stout defensive line that should make a return in the 2025 season. And notably, Chandler Rivers and Terry Moore will lock down the secondary positions for the Duke Blue Devils. They do have a few tougher non-conference scheduled games, home against Illinois and then at Tulane, of course, former school of Darian Mensah. But they do have a lighter ACC schedule, I would say. The only marked games I have are home against Georgia Tech, who we'll get to here in a little bit. We'll sneak peek. And they have at Clemson off of a bye week. So Duke, could make some noise in the ACC this year, I think. They definitely have an outside chance for sure. But the ACC definitely wide open, other than Clemson at the top, obviously. So that is it for the Duke Blue Devils. Our next team on the outside looking in for me might be a surprise to some people. I have the Oklahoma Sooners on the outside looking in as of right now. Over under total coming into 2025 at a 6.5 wins. They finished the season in 2024 a little shaky. They get the signature win against Alabama, basically destroyed them at home in Norman to finish the regular season, but then lost to Navy in their bowl game. Now Navy's no pushover, obviously, from the group of 5 in the American Conference. But they finished the season 6-7. They had the 113th total offense with the 119th ranked passing offense. So obviously, they go out in the portal. They get their guy, John Mateer from Washington State. They get Jaden Ott at running back from Cal. The biggest question on the offensive side I have is, will their offensive line improve? They also get offensive coordinator Ben Arbuckle to also come over from Washington State with John Mateer. So the biggest question for me, they'll have all the capabilities with their running backs and receivers, but will that offensive line be able to hold up? That's part of the reason Jackson Arnold transferred from Auburn, is because he wasn't getting the protection last season at Oklahoma. So the biggest question mark for me I have there on the offensive side, at least, is will that offensive line be able to, step up their game and be able to compete at the level of an SEC schedule? And Brent Venables, their head coach, going back to calling the defense full time, which they'll need to show improvement on that side of the ball. Clearly, with the record that they showed last season, going through a full SEC schedule. Their front 7-8 will be the major strength of their defense, but they'll need to show improvement on the back end, I believe. So yeah, that front 7-8 for Oklahoma will definitely be the marquee, attraction of that defense. And obviously, second season in the SEC, their schedule is definitely not a pushover. Once again, a very tough schedule this year for Oklahoma. their second game of the season, they get Michigan at home. So that'll be not easy, but a quick test for John Mateer and that offense to see can they really hang with a top tier defense like Michigan's. So that'll be a very interesting watch, for the first game of this or the second game of the season. And then they go at Temple, which is very odd considering they hosted Temple last year, but they go to Philly to play Temple, and then they host Auburn, Kent State, and then they have the Red River rivalry against Texas, at South Carolina, home to Ole Miss, at Tennessee, a bye week at Bama, home to Missouri, and then home against LSU. A very tough schedule again for Oklahoma. I am slightly leaning their under. If you had to take a bet on that win total, I would slightly lean under, but then also I could see the point that you flip a couple of these games, at Tennessee could go in their favor, home against Ole Miss could go in their favor, at South Carolina, home against Auburn. I have them losing to Bama. I have them losing to LSU. I have them losing to Texas in the Red River rivalry. And then if you flip that Michigan game, I could see that as well. So, I see their high end, their high upside, they could go 9-3 depending on those flip games, but they also could finish as low in my projection at 6-6 again. So it really just depends, again, that offensive line, can they hold up in a full SEC schedule for John Mateer and Jaden Ott. Our next outsider looking in, the Kansas State Wildcats. And, obviously Iowa State there as well on the outside, so we will get to them in a second. But they open up the season against Iowa State in Dublin on the 23rd, 15 days away, baby. Can't wait. Their over-under win total coming into 2025 is 8.5 wins. They return Avery Johnson at quarterback with a running back duo of Dylan Edwards and Joe Jackson there in the backfield as well. But offensive line production, they did lose a couple starters on the offensive line, so I'm intrigued to see how they will be able to perform as a unit this season. And defensively, they have a lot to replace on the back end. They have a lot of youth in that secondary, which I'm curious to see how they'll get along this season. But Austin Romaine and Toby is sorry for my pronunciation here. Osunsanmi. I hope I pronounced that right. Apologies. But they'll make up that front half of the defense, which will hopefully, be stout again for Kansas State coming into the 2025 season. I list their schedule as a couple of unknowns. Obviously, as I said, they open up against conference opponent Iowa State in Dublin on the 23rd in week 0. And then sneaky non-conference game. They host Army a couple weeks later. And then they go at Baylor. This is the stretch of games I have marked to keep an eye on for Kansas State if they're really going to have success this season. They go at Baylor, against TCU at home, a bye week at Kansas in their rivalry game, and then home against Texas Tech, another bye week, and then at Oklahoma State, at Utah, and then home against Colorado. So that 4-game stretch between Baylor and Texas Tech, that's the one I have marked to really keep an eye out for Kansas State. That's a really tough part of their schedule. Especially sneaky game at Kansas, who's looking to improve this season with Jalen Daniels back at quarterback there for Kansas off of a bye. I just see it as a really sneaky spot there for Kansas State. And then finally into their conference opponent that they will be playing in Dublin, Iowa State, coming in at a over-under total of 7.5 wins. Matt Campbell signed a long-term extension through 2032, so he's back there after getting some NFL interest. And, he's coming off the best season in school history at Iowa State. They finished with 11 wins there for the Cyclones last year, made it to the Big 12 championship, ended up losing to the wagon of Arizona State. But Iowa State, once again, no team to overlook this season, though. They have a couple of transfers coming in at wide receiver. They'll be rotating there at tight end. And they have 106 combined starts returning on the offensive line, which is great to have that offensive line continuity, because it always starts in the trenches, especially in the Big 12. It always starts within the trenches to win these games. Their linebackers will be the strength of their defense with a few returners within that secondary unit. And they have 4 transfers within that defensive line unit, which they will hopefully be able to improve on the abysmal 17 sacks in the 2024 season. That won't get the job done in the Big 12, especially. You need to be able to force pressure on these top-tier quarterbacks that you're going to be facing at least every week. Now, the depth of their schedule, obviously the Big 12 is loaded again this year, so again, Kansas State, they open up against them in Dublin. The Cy-Hawk Trophy, again, they get Iowa at home this year, at Colorado, a bye week, and then home against BYU. Versus Arizona State, they get them at home, at TCU, and then a bye week, and then against Kansas at home. So for their win projection, I'm leaning their over. I'm looking at their basement record of 8-4 with an upward record of 10-2. So the potential is there for Iowa State. Rocco Becht also returning at quarterback. So the Cyclones definitely have a lot of potential to be a high up-end team in the Big 12 again this season, especially with their O-line continuity at 106 combined starts and Rocco Becht returning at quarterback. And that D-line, I'm really curious to see how those 4 transfers will make out for the Cyclones this year. So those are my outside teams looking in, coming into the 2025 season. Now we get into the good stuff. We get into my top 25. Take a quick sip here. All right. My preseason top 25. Coming in at number 25, once again, another Big 12 team, the Utah Utes. Coming in with the over-under win record of 7.5 wins. They add dynamic quarterback Devin Dampier from New Mexico, along with his offensive coordinator, Jason Beck, who had the 4th ranked total offense in 2024. They come over to Utah. They have 2 star tackles to protect Devin Dampier and support that run game in Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu. Their running back rotations between Rayshawn Parker and Nate Johnson look to keep up the production on the offensive side of the ball, because they really had more success running the ball last year than passing the ball with all their quarterback questions. They kept rotating quarterbacks last year. So Devin Dampier looking to, bring some stability to that quarterback position for sure. And then on the defensive side, I have Lander Barton headlining the linebacker group with Smith Snowden and Tal Johnson within that secondary unit. So really, Utah defensively, they're going to be right back to where they were last season. The strength of their team was their defense. They'll always be playing good defense under head coach Kyle Whittingham. So the Utah Utes I have as a kind of a sleeper team in the Big 12, especially with Devin Dampier and his explosibility at the quarterback position. Definitely will have eyes on Utah coming this season. Their hardest games they all get at home: Texas Tech, Arizona State, Colorado, and Kansas State. But they do have a few road tests that I could see if they go 3-1 or at least split them. That'll be pretty good. They're at UCLA, at West Virginia. Morgantown's always going to be jumping, at BYU, which is always tough, especially if that ends up being a night game again against their rival, and at Baylor. So again, their over-under win total of 7.5. I have them projecting going over. So I have their bottom at 8-4 and their ceiling at 9-3. So again, I have Utah. They could be a competitor in the Big 12 for sure, depending how other teams shake out as well. Number 24, the Nebraska Cornhuskers in the Big 10. Huge sleeper team for me this year. Huge sleeper team, the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Over-under win total of 7.5. Going into year 3 under Matt Rule, which at his previous stops, Baylor and Temple, he tends to reach another level in year 3. And going into the second year of Dylan Raiola as their starting quarterback. The addition of Dana Holgerson as offensive coordinator, I think, will be a big help to Dylan Raiola, as Holgerson tends to run an air raid style offense. So I think that's good for Raiola with his arm talent, and definitely some of the receivers and pieces that they added on the offensive side of the ball for sure. Emmett Johnson will be the featured running back, who's good in both the run and the pass game. Obviously, they added Dane Keene at wide receiver from Kentucky, as well as Neziah Hunter, from Cal. So they get 2 big-time receivers. Dane Key, I think, is going to be a big-time playmaker for Dylan Raiola in that offense. They get 2 offensive linemen joining from the portal in Rocco Spindler and Elijah Pritchett from Notre Dame and Alabama, respectively. So they get that big-time level experience coming into the offensive line group. And according to Matt Rule and some reports, the O-line has been the highlight of spring ball so far. So that offense has a chance to be explosive this year for sure. John Butler takes over as the defensive coordinator for Nebraska. And he picked up a couple of linebackers within the portal. Marquez Watson Trent, who is the Sun Belt Conference Defensive Player of the Year for Georgia Southern last year, and Dason McCullough from Oklahoma, alongside of a healthy Deshaun Singleton at safety. I think that defense will be serviceable. I don't know if it'll really make the waves that other defenses will in the Big Ten. I'm looking more to the offensive side of the ball for Nebraska, but definitely their defense will take a step up this season for sure, I believe. They have a very manageable schedule, which I think is why they're a sneaky team for a lot of people coming into this year. They open the season against Cincinnati and Kansas City, so neutral site. Week 4, they get Michigan at home, so that'll be a big test for them early on in their season. That'll be a big benchmark game, if they want to compete and take that level up as teams normally have under Matt Rule in year 3. That Michigan game at home in week 4 is definitely the marquee matchup to look out for. They go to Minnesota, and then they have a 4-game stretch on the back end of their season. They host USC, go to UCLA, go to Penn State, and then host Iowa. So definitely those final 4 games are no pushover. UCLA is what it is, but USC at Penn State and against Iowa, if they could go 3-1 in that stretch, they definitely have a lot of upside to go over their win total. I projected at 8-4 at their bottom, and up to 10-2. So I am very high on Nebraska coming into the season. Outside chance at the playoff, I believe. So I'm high on the Cornhuskers this year for sure. At number 23, we have the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. There we go. Sorry about that. Coming in at number 23, we have the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets coming in at a over-under total of 7.5 wins. Huge fan of Brent Key and the job he's done at Georgia Tech as the head coach. They return Haynes King at quarterback, Jamal Haynes, their leading running back, who had 944 yards rushing and 9 touchdowns on the ground. They returned 2 all-ACC guards, a part of the offensive line, who was third in the nation in sacks given up in 2024. So that's really good. Again, we talked about before, offensive line continuity. That's a really big part for some of these teams and the success that they're going to see. If they return a bunch of starters on the offensive line, that's a huge benefit. They add Eric Rivers in the portal from FIU at receiver, but lost their star receiver Eric Singleton to Auburn. Malik Rutherford is also going to be making some plays at the receiver position as he caught 62 balls last season. Now they have lots of turnover on the defensive front, which lacked in production from 2024. Their transfer additions in the secondary also should improve on their 5 interceptions that they had from 2024. So defensively, they need to take a step up, but I am really liking all the offensive continuity and returning production for Georgia Tech on that side of the ball. Their schedule is also really favorable in the ACC. They have a tough opening game at Colorado, but I do see them winning that because Colorado, I think, will be down a little bit this year slightly. They host Clemson, which I think they could compete with, in their 3rd game. If they hang around with the Tigers, at least I think they definitely have a fighting shot the rest of the season. They host Virginia Tech. They're at Duke, home to Pitt, and then they have their rivalry game against Georgia, which I think they will drop. So their over-under total is 7.5 wins. I'm slamming that. I've actually already bet that. I have already bet their over-win total is 7.5 wins. I'm projecting them in the ACC championship game. I have their bottom win total at 9-3, all the way up to 11-1. Realistically, because if you flip that Clemson game that they host and then they lose to Georgia, they could be an 11-1 team playing in the ACC championship, in my opinion. So Georgia Tech, very high on them, very, very big sleeper team in the ACC. I don't project they'll win it because I think Clemson is just too strong. But definitely, outside noise to shake up the ACC for sure. At number 22, we have the Baylor Bears, an over-under win total of 7.5. They finished the season last year on a 6-1 stretch with quarterback Sawyer Robertson coming back again. And in that stretch at the end of the season, they averaged 34 points a game with 440 yards per game, which is incredible. And a handful of pass catchers will play a big role with Bryson Washington and Dawson Pendergrass, combining for 1,700 yards on the ground and 18 touchdowns at running back. They have a lot of pass catchers. Again, like I said, that will play a huge role this year. But a lot of returning production on defense, which I think a lot of people aren't talking about with Baylor. You know, a lot of returning production at linebacker. Their safeties are being said to have been making plays during fall camp, which is a good sign to me. And they add depth to the defensive line, which I think needs to be the biggest step up for them defensively this year. I think the defensive line was, their biggest weakness on defense. I would say not a problem, but definitely their biggest weakness for sure. And again, typical Big 12 schedule. They have a very tough front half of the season, but they get some tougher games at home, which is to their benefit. They open the season against Auburn, which I think will be a big test. I haven't picked a winner for that game. We'll talk about that next week. We'll preview. We'll get into week 1 games next week, but tough game against Auburn for sure to open the season. They go to SMU, like I said before. They host Samford, and then they're home against Arizona State, and that's just in their first 4 games: Auburn at SMU, Samford at home, and against Arizona State at home. That's just in their first 4 games. Now, if they go, I would say 2-2, because they won't be. I don't think they'll be favored against Arizona State. They probably won't be favored against SMU either, and I do not know the Auburn line off the top of my head. So, but that's just their first 4 games, and then they also get Kansas State at home and Utah at home. So Baylor definitely has a chance. Because the Big 12 is wide open once again. I believe a lot of teams that could compete at the top of the Big 12 conference for sure. And rounding out the bottom 5 teams, we have the Louisville Cardinals at number 21. Over under win total of 8.5. I love the work that Jeff Brom has done at Louisville and just the overall, culture he's built there for the Cardinals. They bring in quarterback Miller Moss from USC, who got benched at the end of last season and, is using his last year eligibility at Louisville. I don't think he's a quarterback to really, I wouldn't say sleep on, but I don't think he's one you could definitely overlook. If you have Louisville on the schedule this year, they return Isaac Brown, who's a dynamic running back, also with Duke Watson back at running back. Isaac Brown is arguably a top 5 running back in the country. I remember the Clemson game when they played at Clemson last year. He killed them on the ground. So Isaac Brown is definitely one to watch in the backfield for Louisville this year. He comes back. They have dynamic veteran receivers in Chris Bell and Colin Lacey, and they added 3 transfers They added transfers alongside 3 returners on the offensive line. So once again, offensive line continuity. We will talk about that a lot in this video. Offensive line continuity is a huge part of team success early in the season for sure. And they have a lot of returning production up front on the defensive line, but they have revamped the back end of the defense in the secondary and the linebackers. So Louisville, will rely heavily on that front 7-8, to really carry the defense. Their schedule, I do see it as a challenge. They get a lot of tough away games. They do host JMU early on in the non-conference, which I think could be a contender in the group of 5 conversation. They go to Pitt, to Miami, to Virginia Tech. They host Clemson at least, so that's a benefit, but then they also go to SMU later in the season. So a lot of tough road games for Louisville this year. I'm slightly leaning to their over at 9-3 of that 8.5 win total. I'm slightly leaning 9-3. It really just depends. Can they find success in those road games? They can't let off at Pitt. They can't let off at Virginia Tech. SMU's I view as a 50-50 game. Miami will be tough, especially in the trenches. Miami's a lot up front offensively and defensively. So that'll probably be chalked up as a loss. And then they host Clemson, but then, if Clemson, stays healthy and everything like that, that's a loss in my opinion. So 9-3, I'm leaning to the over for Louisville. So, but everything's a projection right now. Everything's a projection. We're trying to be optimistic. We're not trying to tear down these teams very badly. We're trying to stay positive. Into our next batch of teams. Coming in at number 20, the Ole Miss Rebels. Over under 8.5 wins. coming into the 2025 season. Lane Kiffin, one of the better head coaches in college football. They lose Jackson Dart, obviously, to the draft at quarterback, but they do have Austin Simmons, who, if you've paid attention, he had the drive of the season basically for Ole Miss against Georgia. Jackson Dart went down hurt. Austin Simmons comes in, leads them to a touchdown as soon as he comes in. So Austin Simmons, he's been compared a lot to Tua Tagovailoa, not only because he looks exactly like him, in my opinion, he looks exactly like him, but he's also another lefty. So another SEC quarterback, that throws lefty like Tua. So, but I'm projecting Ole Miss at number 20 simply because I don't think that Georgia game is really enough of a sample size to, be enough to project Ole Miss, to be successful this year. They lost 14 starters from 2024. They do have the top portal class, though, so that's something to go off of. A lot of new faces on the offensive side of the ball, except Caden Lee at receiver. Have to give a shout out to him. Caden Lee, a dog at receiver. They have 4 new starters in the offensive line, so a lot of question marks along the offensive side of the ball for Ole Miss. They lost almost their whole entire defensive line, but a lot of previous recruits that they've brought in are now going to get a lot of playing time for them. Deshaun Womack at the edges with Prince Will. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that last name, but Prince Will and Deshaun Womack on the edges from Nebraska and LSU come over to hopefully get some of that production back on the defensive line for Ole Miss. And they have a whole new secondary. They lost their whole entire secondary from 2024 coming into this season. And, typical SEC schedule, they get Tulane in the non-conference, which is not a sleeper game. They definitely should not overlook Tulane. They get LSU at home, though. They're at Georgia and at Oklahoma versus South Carolina at home, and they get Florida at home. So I'm leaning the over. I'm leaning the over 8.5 wins at 9-3. I'm projecting them. But again, I'm not super high on them. I know I've seen other polls that have Ole Miss higher. And I'm not high on Austin Simmons. I'm not high on Austin Simmons. I'm going to be completely honest. I just think it's too small of a sample size for us to go off of. Now, if he proves himself against Tulane and LSU, early on in the season, he gets both those games at home, then I would feel better about him going into those road tests against Georgia and Oklahoma after that. But as of right now, I am not high on Austin Simmons and Ole Miss, but I still project their win total to go over, and I see them as a 9-3 team. That's how I see the Ole Miss Rebels. Now, number 19, arguably the team of the offseason because of all the drama around them. We have the Tennessee Volunteers at number 19, over under win total of 8.5. So obviously, story of the offseason, they lose Nico Iamaleava to UCLA. And they also lost Dylan Sampson in the draft at running back, who was a former SEC Offensive Player of the Year. So a lot of changes on the offensive side of the ball. They weren't expecting to lose Nico, and they get all the drama with his dad too. It's a whole mess. But it seems to have gone away for the most part now. I finally saw a clip of Nico at UCLA, slinging it over there. So he seems to be doing well for himself, but he is no longer there at Tennessee. Josh Heupel still the head coach, still calling plays, took him to a playoff last year. But I have noted as a mass effort to contribute on the offensive success. The quarterback is still unknown to this point. It could be Jake Merklinger. It could be Joey Aguilar, who came over from App State and UCLA. So, Joey Aguilar is touted to be the starter, I think, at the moment, but it's still a quarterback battle going down there in Knoxville. So we will have to see. And then the defense is still will be exciting, dynamic. I have no marks on the defensive side for Tennessee. I still think they will be very competitive on the defensive side of the ball. And I have it chalked up to a 4-game season for Tennessee if they want to be successful, or at least get back to a playoff discussion how they did last year. they host Georgia, but they go to Bama, then they host Oklahoma, and they go to Florida. Those are the four main games I have. Those are the four main games I have for Tennessee on the season if they want it to be a success. 4 games. I have 4 games for Tennessee. So I am leaning their over win total 9-3. I have it at because I think they'll either win that Georgia game or Oklahoma game at home. So yeah, I'm leaning the over at 9-3. But if someone brought up an argument for their under 8.5 wins, I could totally see that. I wouldn't give much of a fight there. Number 18, the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Excuse me, I'm gonna take a sip. Over under 8.5 wins for Texas Tech, coming in as the number 18 team in my preseason poll. Joey McGuire returning as the head coach, and they're banking on a massive portal class coming in. You know, they're banking on the success of that portal class. Baron Morton returns at quarterback, and a dynamic receiver room led by Coy Eskin and Caleb Douglas in that wide receiver room. But it will take an army to replace Taj Brooks at running back, mainly led by Jacoby Williams and USC transfer Quentin Joyner. And the offensive line will have to be much better. I have noted their offensive line needs to be a lot better with the additions that they brought in the portal. The defensive front is revamped through transfers, headlined by David Bailey from Stanford. And the secondary has a lot of question marks in it that I have marked, but they should settle out, throughout the season. They just have to, get gelled together in that defensive system, through camp in those early games for Texas Tech. And I think if Baron Morton can stay healthy and those transfers pan out quickly, so if they get up to speed really quickly, through fall camp, then Texas Tech, I think, will be a real test in the Big 12, and they'll be able to compete and be in the conversation for the Big 12 championship, I believe. So they have a couple of tough, actually, all of their tough games are on the road. At Utah, at Houston, which I think Houston, you shouldn't sleep on either this year, even though I don't have them in my ranking. I think there will be a step up this year, the Houston Cougars, at Arizona State, at Kansas State, and at West Virginia. So they get a lot of the big boys in the Big 12 on the road. So, that'll be tough. I have them winning the Houston game, winning Kansas State, and winning West Virginia, but I have them losing to Arizona State and at Utah, because at Utah is insane to play at, especially if that ends up being a night game. So I have them leaning over their win total. I have them at 9-3 projected. And yeah, that is the Texas Tech Red Raiders. A lot of turnover there. Also a lot of turnover with this school, number 17, Michigan. Over under win total of 8.5. Now, year 2, Sharon Moore, he'll have a 2-game suspension, I believe, in weeks 3 and 4. So after the Oklahoma game, he won't be there for the Nebraska game, I believe, is the deal there. So 2-game suspension. But second year, Sharon Moore finished the season on a high after beating their rival Ohio State for the 4th time in a row. They beat Alabama in their bowl game. And story of the offseason, along with Nico Iamaleava leading Tennessee, they get the highest ever recruit in Bryce Underwood to flip from LSU to Michigan to stay home in the state. He's projected to be the starter at quarterback, but some reports are saying, Mikey Keene could come out of nowhere and take the job. I'm projecting Bryce Underwood as the starter. I'm projecting Bryce Underwood as the starter for Michigan in game 1. I believe they play New Mexico game 1. So I think Bryce Underwood will be the starter there. They lose a lot of production defensively, but will still be very strong on that side of the ball under coordinator Wink Martindale. They added Justice Haynes in the portal with a handful of transfer receivers, namely headlined by Donovan McCulley. And their tight ends will look to fill the shoes of Colston Leveland, who was a first-round draft pick and was basically their whole offense last season. So got to be better offensively. They only outpassed the academies. So Navy, Air Force, and Army. That's all they outpass the academies who only run the ball anyway. So really bad passing wise last year, really bad passing attack last year. But I think Bryce Underwood will easily flip that switch and get Michigan right back to the quarterback success that they saw with JJ McCarthy a couple seasons ago. They have tough games, obviously Big 10 schedule. But early on, within their first 4 games, they have at Oklahoma and at Nebraska. So that'll be a litmus test for Michigan. I think they could go and beat Oklahoma on the road. But again, it really depends how that defense plays against John Mateer and if Bryce Underwood can get up to speed. They go to USC. They host Washington, who is another team to not sleep on in the Big Ten with Damon Williams there at quarterback. At Michigan State in the rivalry game, and then they host Ohio State this year, looking to go 5 in a row against the Buckeyes, which would be that would be crazy. That would be crazy, but we've seen crazier things before. So I'm leaning the under. I'm leaning the under on their win total only because I don't know how that offense is going to look this season. If it is Bryce Underwood, will he have, some shakiness, early on, especially in those 2 early road tests, Oklahoma and Nebraska? Will he be able to settle in, and get Michigan, back on course throughout the season? Or will he, kind of fluctuate throughout his freshman season? Again, I'm projecting him as a starter, and I'm projecting Michigan to go slightly under their win total. Again, 8.5. I have them going 8-4, which is, with the roster they currently have, Bryce Underwood year 1 at quarterback, I think would be a successful season. And if you end up going 8-4 and then you beat Ohio State for the 5th time, that's easily a great season. So 8-4, I have Michigan projected. I have them number 17 in my poll. Number 16, we have the South Carolina Gamecocks, over under win total of 7.5. A lot of question marks around South Carolina. There was a lot of production, especially defensively, but Shane Beamer comes back this year with star quarterback Lenore Sellers, Dylan Stewart on the edge, leading that defense. But as I said, they lost a lot of defensive production. They have a lot of question marks. Russell Faison, he has some eligibility issues, a transfer from Utah State. He has a lot of eligibility questions right now. Will he even be able to play? He's been cleared to practice, but who knows if he'll be able to play by game 1. Oscar Adaway III, I also have to contribute in the backfield alongside of Sellers. And as I said before, that defense returns Jalen Kilgore in the secondary, but 3 young linebackers come back as well, which combined for 212 tackles. But mainly that defensive front is where they lost a lot of their production last season, and Dylan Stewart's the only one that's really coming back. So will they be able to hold up against these offensive fronts in the SEC? Time will tell. They have a lot of toss-up games. I have marked toss-up games galore. That's what I've wrote for South Carolina. They host Vanderbilt, at Missouri, at LSU, versus Oklahoma, versus Bama, at Ole Miss, and at A&M. And then they have Clemson to finish the season. So Vandy, I guess you could say, is no pushover now, but they get them at home. At Missouri, they could win that. At LSU will be tough. They will probably drop that. They get Oklahoma at home. I can see them win that. They get Bama at home. That'll be tough. At Ole Miss, they could win that. At A&M, if A&M, kind of drops off from where everyone has them projected, they could pull that out. And then they get Clemson at home, which will always be tough, in a rivalry game. I'm leaning their under 7.5 wins. I have them projected at 7-5 at their basement, but 9-3 as the high. So really, I have a bunch of flip games for South Carolina if they could seem to pull them out. I have them finishing 9-3 at their highest. So, and now into my top 15, starting with the Florida Gators at number 15. This might be kind of high. Well, not as high as some people, but relatively high based on the performance that they had last season. Over under wins at 6.5 again for Florida this year. I think that was the same as last year, if not 5.5. So another brutal schedule. I think it's I think it is the hardest schedule in the Power Four. Again, for Florida this year. Billy Napier somehow keeping his job, but tending to find success near the end of that 2024 season. DJ Lagway returning a quarterback. There's been questions throughout camp. He's been in a boot apparently. So, a lot of injury questions with DJ Lagway. They just lost another receiver the other day, Dallas Wilson, who was expected to be a really talented freshman for them at receiver. He'll be out for a few weeks. So the injury bug is definitely caught up with Florida a little bit, but I do expect Lagway. If healthy, I could project him as a top 5 quarterback in the country. So DJ Lagway, definitely one to watch out for with Florida. And they have explosive receivers, as I said before, with Dallas Wilson looking to be, the mainstay there as an incoming freshman. They have a solid offensive line, good running backs. So they're very solid offensively, Florida. Tyreek Sapp and Miles Graham anchor a solid defense. Tyreek Sapp on the edge and Miles Graham back there at linebacker. But the biggest note I have here, and I have it marked in red pen, which are like my key notes. So if Lagway is healthy, they are a sneaky SEC team, and they could make a run for the SEC championship for sure. But again, very, very hard schedule at LSU. This is just an abysmal schedule. At LSU, at Miami, a bye week, host Texas, at A&M, neutral site against Georgia, at Ole Miss, against Tennessee, and against Florida State, who I think will be improved this year in the Seminoles. So I'm leaning over, but just slightly. I have him 7-5. I think that offense could produce again how they did at the tail end of last season. It's really question marks defensively, and if Lagway can stay healthy. If Lagway stays healthy, they're a good team. They could go over that 7.5 I haven't projected at. So at LSU, I think they lose. Miami, I think they lose. Texas at home, I think they lose. So they easily could be going into A&M already having 3 losses. They could be going into College Station already having 3 losses. So definitely early test for Florida. But again, I only have him this high because I'm very high on DJ Lagway. If he stays healthy, he's practically their whole team. And I think he's the biggest difference maker for Florida in their entire season. At number 14, we have the Illinois Fighting Illini. Over under win total of 7.5. Brett Bielema returns star quarterback Luke Altmaier and all 5 offensive line starters, which so far I haven't been able to say about one team. So Illinois returns all 5 starters and very, very productive quarterback Luke Altmaier. Aiden Langery and Caden Fegan will split reps in the backfield along with Khalil Valentine. A wide receiver group that's led by West Virginia transfer Hudson Clement and Tanner Arkin returning a tight end. But they did lose 69% of their receiver production to the NFL, which is basically all of their production from last season to the NFL. So, but their defense finds production from Wisconsin transfers James Thompson Jr. And they also returned Dylan Rosiak, who led the team in tackles. Multiple secondary starters return back, and also Kurt Neal, another Wisconsin transfer, joins that defense. So Illinois, definitely a player in the Big Ten this season for sure, especially on the back of Luke Altmaier, who I think is a very, very good quarterback. And, with an offensive line that he trusts, that he's been behind for a whole season, all 5 starters returning on the offensive line. I've marked they have a very manageable schedule. They go to Duke in the non-conference, which I think they could win, but then they go to Indiana. I think that's their 4th game. They go at Indiana. That will be a huge game for not only the Big Ten race, but, for the projection of Illinois and Indiana's season. I think what either team that wins that game, could be a player for the playoff, on the lower side of the playoff. They host USC, they host Ohio State, and then they go to Washington. So not an easy. They have those games for Illinois are definitely the toughest coming into the 2025 season. But I'm very high on Luke Altmaier. And again, O-line continuity. That's gonna be the topic of the episode. O-line continuity. If you return a lot of offensive line production, and defensive line production, I project you very high. Indiana coming in at number 13, an over/under win total of 8.5. Kurt Signetti. Did you Google him? He wins. He wins. If you didn't Google him, I would Google him. Kurt Signetti. That's C-U-R-T, not with a K. C-U-R-T, Signetti. Coming back off the greatest season in Indiana history, and still come back with a lot of 2024 production and look to, get back to the heights that Indiana reached last season. They return Elijah Surratt at receiver with Omar Cooper, their top two receivers. They add Fernando Mendoza in the portal, who is one of the top quarterbacks coming out into the transfer portal to replace Curtis Rourke. They add Jonathan Brady, also from Cal. So two Cal players, Fernando Mendoza and Jonathan Brady, joining the Hoosiers. They also add Holden Stays and Riley Nowakowski. Hope I pronounced that right, from Wisconsin, and Holden Stays from Tennessee at tight end. And they have a sleeper at running back. I know I've said sleeper a lot. They have a running back to watch in Roman Hemby that they got from Maryland. I think could be a beast at running back for Indiana. They return a lot of defensive production. They return a starter on each level. Mikhail Kamara, stud defensive end, and knows Tyreek Taylor with additions through the portal to help support those two guys. D'Angelo Pons returns in the secondary, and leading tackler Aiden Fisher is back at linebacker. The schedule has some bumps in it. Obviously that fourth game, I think that's a Big Ten opener for them against Illinois. They go to Iowa and then a bye week and then at Oregon. I haven't marked that's within a 4-week stretch. So they host, or a 4-game stretch at least. So they host Illinois, go to Iowa, have a bye, and then at Oregon, which is very tough. And then they have a game later in the season at Penn State. So, Indiana, definitely a tougher schedule this year. I'm leaning their over 8.5 wins at 9-3 with upwards of 10-2. If they beat Illinois, if they win that Iowa game on the road, they'll obviously they won't be favored against Oregon and Penn State, both on the road. So, but they avoid Michigan and Ohio State. So, if Indiana can flip some of those games I mentioned, especially in that 4-game stretch, right after their non-conference, I think they will be on an upward trajectory for the season for sure. Coming in at number 12, we have the Texas A&M Aggies. Over under win total at 7.5. I love the job that Mike Elko is doing after year one, coming a game away from the SEC championship game in that loss to Texas in the final regular season game. They return Marcel Reed at quarterback, have a host of wide receivers led by transfer Casey Concepcion and Terry Bussey. They return all 5 offensive line starters, which I love. Star running back Le'Veon Moss is back. They retooled that defensive line with TJ Searcy from Florida and Damon Haynes from Rutgers. Because Scorton and Stewart, their 2 top defensive linemen, both got drafted. They have terrific linebacker depth and an all SEC corner in Will Lee returning, along with Georgia transfer Julian Humphrey to make up that secondary unit. And the mark I have for their schedule is, can they manage it? Very tough non-conference game to go to Notre Dame. They host Auburn, host Florida. They're at Fayetteville, at Arkansas, at Fayetteville. They're at LSU, at Missouri, against South Carolina at home, and then at Texas. So there definitely could be a let-off for A&M this year, considering I literally saw a post today that Marcel Reed apparently has heard all of us saying that he can't pass the ball, that he's, like Lamar Jackson, when Lamar Jackson came out to go to the NFL. He can't pass the ball, and he's hurt us. And, if Marcel Reed is able to pass the ball, I haven't projected over their win total at 8-4 with upwards of 10-2. So, but I've seen other projections have them go 5-7 or 6-6 with their schedule. So I think the biggest litmus test, if they could at least compete with Notre Dame on the road in South Bend, I think that'll be the biggest, factor to their success this season. If they can win, if they could at least compete, if not win that non-conference test at Notre Dame, I think that's the biggest test for them. big litmus test early on in the season there. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much, first of all. But remember to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell as well. It's college football season. What's not to love about it? I'm gonna adjust my lighting so you can actually see me. Yeah, hit that like, comment, and subscribe button. We love all the support, and also leave a comment. I mean, it's prediction season. It's prediction season. We're all making predictions. We're all trying to be positive as well. We're all trying to project these over totals for wins for these teams. So last spot outside of my top 10, the Miami Hurricanes of the ACC, an over under win total of 9.5. Mario Cristobal, couldn't get the job done at the end of last season with Heisman Trophy candidate Cam Ward. Couldn't get over the hump, lost that key game at Syracuse at the end of the season, also lost at Georgia Tech on the back end of the season, but he looks to bounce back this season with transfer Carson Beck coming over from Georgia. And literally the second note I made under Miami was they need to limit penalties. They were 120th in the FBS in penalty yards given up. They averaged 67.5 penalty yards per game. So stop getting flags thrown on you for stupid stuff, at least stuff you can control. They lose their top 6 offensive weapons either through the transfer portal or graduation. But they added back CJ Daniels from LSU and Keelan Marion from BYU, as well as Tony Johnson from Cincinnati. They returned Josiah Trader and Ray Joseph as well at receiver, and Elijah Lofton will look to be a productive tight end to back up what Arroyo did last season, and Alex Ballman, also a transfer from Tulane there at tight end. They have massive continuity on the offensive line with Francis Mauigoa at right tackle and James Brockermeyer, who was the TCU starting center last year, comes over to Miami. Their defensive line looks like it could be really disruptive, led by Ruben Bain, Wesley Bizanthi, if I'm pronouncing that right, excuse me, returns to his second in tackles at linebacker, and Xavier Lucas, a transfer from Wisconsin, and OJ Frederick headline the secondary unit. But they cannot let off the gas this season. That's the note I've made, or you will get got. That's what I've wrote down here in pencil, not pen, pencil. We can erase this stuff. They opened the season against Notre Dame at home, but they also get Florida at Florida State. That's just the first 3-4 games of the season. They get Louisville at home. They're at SMU, which is their first game outside of the state of Florida on November 1st. They don't leave the state of Florida until November 1st for an away game at SMU. All their games are either at home or within the state of Florida. So that's crazy. Don't know how ACC schedulers let that happen, but they did. They get Syracuse at home, which will look for revenge. And then they also have to go to Virginia Tech and Pitt at the back end of their season, which a South Florida team traveling north at that time of the year, it will be cold. It will be very cold. Again, they're over under win total at 9.5. I have them leaning over at 10-2, upwards to 11-1. They don't get Clemson. They'll be favored in practically every game they play except Notre Dame, I believe. They'll be favored in every game except the opener against Notre Dame. So, Miami, what do you got? Carson Beck, what do you got? He's really the biggest question mark, for Miami coming this season. Will Carson Beck be able to get back to the levels he did with Georgia? All right. All right. And now finally, my top 10 coming into the 2025 season. At number 10, Arizona State. Forks up. Arizona State, over under 8.5 wins. Love Kenny Dillingham and the job he's doing there at Arizona State. The culture he's built and what he stands for as a coach. Also, if you haven't seen any of his press conferences or like media time, watch Kenny Dillingham speak. one, he's hilarious, and two, he's straight up. He's not going to beat around the bush with what he tells you about his team. I love the job Kenny Dillingham does. They return the best offensive duo in college football, and Sam Levitt at quarterback and Jordan Tyson at receiver, which is already a huge get. They add Kanye Udo from Army, who should lead the rushing attack along with Kyson Brown. Replacing Scadaboo is obviously going to be a huge test. But Kanye Udo from Army, obviously they only run the ball at Army, so that's a great addition to the running back room. Jordan Tyson also gets help from Malik McClain, who was the number 2 receiver last season. They get transfers Noble Johnson from Clemson and Jalen Moss from Fresno State. They return 4 of the 5 starters in the offensive line. But the question marks I have are on the defensive side, actually. They will need to improve on the defensive line with Clayton Smith, CJ Fight, Michael Gardner joining over from Oregon as well. They have stellar linebackers headlined by Keyshawn Elliott, Jordan Locke, Cyrus Fiezo, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, and Martell Hughes make up the linebacking core. And then the secondary might be the best in the conference, headlined by Miles Roswar. So, and Xavier Alford as well. So the secondary is the headline of that defense. They lost a lot of the defensive line production either from the draft or graduation. So that's the biggest question mark on the defensive side, at least. Schedule-wise, they do have tough road games, but, that's the highlight of their schedule. They have tough road games. Non-conference, they have at Missouri State, or not Missouri State, at Mississippi State, Texas State at home, and then at Baylor, TCU at home, at Utah, Texas Tech at home, at Iowa State versus West Virginia, and then at Colorado. So a lot of the tougher games in their Big 12 schedule they get on the road, Iowa State and Utah namely. So, and then Colorado to finish off the season. We don't know how Colorado will be at that point of the season. So, but you can't overlook them. Can't overlook any conference game. So Arizona State coming in at number 10. A lot of offensive line continuity. Again, we're going to keep talking about it. Love the offensive line. If you're returning production, I'm high on you. Number 9, the Oregon Ducks. Over under 10.5 wins for their season in 2025. Dan Lanning, coming off the bitter taste felt in the Rose Bowl after getting splattered by Ohio State. But they did go undefeated and win the Big Ten in their first season in the conference. The offense gets turned over to Dante Moore this season, though, who transferred over from UCLA after starting a couple games for them 2 seasons ago. Sat behind Dylan Gabriel for a year. So has already been familiar with that offensive system under Will Stein at offensive coordinator. They add Mekhi Hughes, who is arguably a top 5 player out of the portal from Tulane at running back. Freshman DeCorian Moore will have a big impact at wide receiver as they lost Evan Stewart, who was their top receiver, to a season-ending injury. But they also returned Kenyon Sadiq at tight end, who looks to be a dynamic NFL prospect type of tight end. They have 4 new starters on the offensive line, which is the biggest question mark for them. New quarterback and 4 new starters on the offensive line. But their strengths defensively look to be on the edges with Mateo Uiagalelei and Tatum Tuioti, if I'm pronouncing that right. Again, apologies if I'm not. Bear Alexander transferred over from USC. Looks to be a nose guard alongside Amari Washington and Devin Jackson. And Purdue transfer Dylan Thieneman is the major standout within that secondary. Again, another arguably top 10 transfer over from Purdue, was the highest ranked safety in the portal. So a great get from Coach Lanning there on the defensive side of the ball. The mark I have for their schedule is people asking, do they have any hiccups in their schedule? Based on how they played it last year. And I say probably not. They probably will have hiccups. They get Oklahoma State in the non-conference at home, but then they go at Penn State, first Big Ten game. That will be the whiteout for Penn State. I will be at that game. Can't wait to see it. I've never seen a West Coast team before. So like Washington, UCLA, USC. Haven't watched them in person before. So that'll be great to watch. In the whiteout at Penn State, they get Indiana at home, at Iowa versus Minnesota versus USC, and then at Washington to finish the season. those road games are really going to make up Oregon's season. Penn State, Iowa, Washington, all on the road. Obviously, Penn State and Iowa, no, all three of them, very tough places to play. So I think Oregon will have a little bit of regression this season. I'm leaning they're under at 10-2 at this current moment with upwards of 11-1. The only game I have them projected losing right now is Penn State. But they could drop that Iowa game, tough environment. They could drop that Washington game. If Indiana brings their A game to Eugene, they could somehow drop that game to Indiana. So a lot of tough games for Oregon. A lot of newness on the offensive side of the ball at quarterback and offensive line. So a lot of question marks for Oregon coming this season, but I have them ranked at number 9. Number 8, the LSU Tigers. Over under win total of 8.5. Brian Kelly comes back with Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback, and now he has tendonitis in his knee. He did not tear his ACL as everyone thought that he did. So let's cool our jets on that. He has tendonitis in his knee. But the biggest question mark for me I have, obviously with Garrett Nussmeier coming back, will Brian Kelly waste another Heisman Trophy level quarterback? He already wasted Jaden Daniels, didn't make it to a playoff, didn't make it to a national championship with already one Heisman level quarterback. He has a second one in Garrett Nussmeier now. Will he be able to get over the hump, get in the playoff, and make a run at it with his star quarterback? He has all the tools to do so. Stud wide receivers: Nick Anderson from Oklahoma, Barian Brown coming in from Kentucky, Destin Hill from Florida State. They returned Caden Durham at running back, while also returning Aaron Anderson at receiver, Xavier Thomas, and Chris Hilton, all at receiver. They will have to fill holes within the offensive line that they had lost from the 2024 season. Their linebackers are made up of stars like Harold Perkins, Witt, and Wes Weeks, who are both studs. The D-line got better with Patrick Payton from Florida State coming over, Jack Pyburn joining from Florida, as well as 355-pound nose guard Sydir Mitchell from Texas. 355. I can only imagine how he would look in person. That is a mammoth of a man. Their secondary is looking good with Mansour Delane coming over from Virginia Tech to headline that secondary alongside DJ Pickett and Ashton Stamps to make up that secondary group. Typical SEC schedule, very tough. They open the season at Clemson, which they are not favored in. Tough opener. Battle of the Death Valleys. At Clemson, they host Florida, go to Ole Miss, host South Carolina, at Vanderbilt, versus A&M, at Bama, and at Oklahoma. So tough schedule for LSU. It's really, can Brian Kelly get it done? He's one of the best coaches in college football and has been for a very long time, but still no national championship. Hasn't even made the playoff yet with Notre Dame or LSU. So can Brian Kelly get over the hump? That's the biggest question. And they come in at number 8 in my poll. Number 7, the Georgia Bulldogs, over under win total of 9.5. They were very uncharacteristic in 2024. Struggled to run the ball, led the country in drops, but still ended up beating Texas twice and won the SEC. Played a throw-over game against Alabama. But the biggest headline is no more Carson Beck as he left for Miami. So the keys are officially handed over to Gunnar Stockton to lead them into 2025. He came in at the back end of that 24 season, as you remember. Played in the SEC championship after Beck went down. Practically ran into a car, got in a car crash in the Texas game in the SEC championship, and then didn't really do much, in the Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame. He definitely struggled in that game for sure. But that wasn't fully on him. His receivers weren't helping him either. But speaking of receivers, they added a bunch in the portal, a lot of production, and Zachariah Branch coming over from USC and Noah Thomas coming over from Texas A&M. They add returners and Colby Young and Dylan Bell also in that receiver group. The running backs will be by committee with Nate Frazier, Bo Walker, and Chauncey Bowens making up that running back group. But the questions on the O-line again, 4 starters leaving. So they'll have 4 new starters on the offensive line for Georgia. And defensive coordinator Glenn Schumann returns 3 stout defensive linemen with Christian Miller, Jordan Hall, and Xavier McLeod. Lots of depth at linebacker as well. They will go 4 or 5 deep. And their defensive backs are led by Dalen Everett and KJ Bolden. And, I trust Kirby, to get the ship right this season. I really do. A workable schedule. They get their hardest games at home. They go to Tennessee early on in the season, but then they get Bama at home, at Auburn versus Ole Miss, neutral site game against Florida, and then they get Texas at home and then Georgia Tech in the neutral site to finish the season. So a lot of their tougher games at home, like I said, I'm leaning their over win total over 9.5. I haven't projected at 10-2 with upwards of going undefeated. If Kirby gets this team back to how Georgia has played in the past, they could go undefeated. Obviously tough games, but they get them at home. So Kirby could get the dogs right for sure. Number 6, we have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Over under win total of 10.5. Obviously, they don't play in a conference, but they made the college football playoff national championship for the first time under Marcus Freeman last year. And will they be able to, retool both sides of the ball where they lost key senior playmakers to be able to get back to those heights once again? They have a quarterback battle going on right now between CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey. Word has it that Kenny Minchey is keeping it closer than people thought it would have been. But I have CJ Carr projected to win that race at quarterback. They return arguably the best running back duo in the country with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Jaden Greathouse makes up the wide receiver room with adds of Malachi Fields from UVA, and Eli Raridan is projected as the starting tight end. And CJ Carr will have a better and bigger arm than last season. So CJ Carr, I think, will win that battle. He'll have a better arm than Riley Leonard did last season. And new defensive coordinator Chris Ash, obviously they lost their defensive coordinator. So Chris Ash comes in and he inherits a lot of talent and depth on the defensive side. Leonard Moore and Christian Gray will lead the secondary along with Adon Schuler. And linebackers are led by Drake Bowen and Kingston Villamu Asa. Apologies if I mispronounce that again. So a lot of returning production on the defensive side, which is great to see. And if Notre Dame plays to their potential, their schedule is very workable. They get their 2 hardest games in the first 3 weeks of the season. They go at Miami, have a bye week, and then host Texas A&M. And then the rest of their schedule is very workable at Arkansas versus Boise State, USC at home, at Boston College, and at Pitt. So I'm going over their win total again. Over 10.5. It's a high number. I see them going 11-1. If they go 1-1 in those first 2 games, I see them winning out the rest of the way, with upwards of going undefeated if they win both of those games. So Notre Dame, very high on them once again. Love CJ Carr if he ends up winning the battle. If Kenny Minchey does, we will revisit them. But I project CJ Carr to be the starting quarterback. At number 5, Alabama. Let me switch the graphic here. At number 5, we have the Alabama Crimson Tide. Over under win total of 9.5. Year 2 of Kalen DeBoer, and obviously didn't live up to the hype of last season and the expectations as they had with Nick Saban. And the question I have for them is, will the Tide be able to retool and make it back to the top of the SEC? They have a quarterback battle also going on right now. Ty Simpson is projected to be the starter and is leading right now, but is being held up by Austin Mack as they both look to replace Jalen Milroe, who left for the NFL. They also brought in 5-star quarterback Keelan Russell as a freshman. So, but I project Ty Simpson to win that battle for sure. He reunited with Ryan Grubb as his offensive coordinator, which he had at Washington. They returned star wide receiver Ryan Williams along with Jeremy Bernard, who will hopefully elevate the passing game to even better levels this season, especially with a more capable passing quarterback in Ty Simpson or Austin Mack. I think they're both better passers than Jalen Milroe. So they are strong and deep defensively, led by returners Deontay Lawson and Keon Sapp. And they have a workable schedule. If everything works out at the quarterback position, as I think it will, they have a very workable schedule. They go at Florida State, at Georgia, at Missouri, versus Tennessee, at South Carolina, versus LSU, versus Oklahoma, and at Auburn. So an SEC schedule, obviously the toughest on that schedule is at Georgia. So, and then they host LSU. So basically a 2-game season for Alabama. They'll be favored in every other game this season. Maybe what's another one they could maybe struggle at? I see Missouri being a sneaky one potentially, or at South Carolina. But I think they could get over the hump in both those games. I'm leaning over their win total at 10.5 with upwards of 11-1. I really only see them if they go 11-1, they only lose that Georgia game on the road. So Alabama, I have them projected 5th in my preseason top 25. Number 4, the reigning defending national champion Ohio State Buckeyes. Over under win total of 10.5. Defending national champions Ryan Day finally got over the hump. But a lot of questions coming into this season. They lost a lot of production from that team in 2024, a lot of senior leaders, 2 new coordinators on both sides of the ball. They will have a quarterback battle that's currently going on to replace Will Howard, a quarterback, between Julian Sayin and Lincoln Kienholz. Julian Sayin is projected to be the starter, but it's being kept close by Lincoln Kienholz, per reports that I have seen. And also saw a report today that Ryan Day plans to name a starter by the end of next week. So hopefully we will get some news relative to who will be the starting quarterback for Ohio State. As I said before, 2 new coordinators between Brian Hartline and Patricia on the defensive side. The best player in the country returns, Jeremiah Smith. They also return receivers Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis, which will lead that skill group, along with star tight end Max Clare transferring over from Purdue. They return 3 starters on the offensive line, and James Peoples returns at running back, who got some playing time at the end of last season, but he'll get a lot more production this year, alongside of transfer running back C.J. Donaldson from West Virginia. Caleb Downs obviously leads the defense alongside Davidson, Igbinosun, and Jermaine Matthews. And that secondary, I think, will be the strength of the defense. Lorenzo Styles and Jalen McClain also make up that back end in the secondary. Kenyatta Jackson and UNC transfer Bo Atkinson will be the ringleaders up front, along with Sonny Styles to lead that linebacking core alongside Arvell Reese. And their schedule, if they overcome the early tests, they should be okay. Obviously, they have the big opener against Texas at home, and they go to Washington off of a bye week. They go to Illinois. They host Penn State off of a bye week, off a mutual bye week. Penn State's also off a bye week in that game, and then they go to Michigan to play the game. So Ohio State, I'm leaning just under their win total. I have them just under 10.5. I have them at 10-2. I have them losing the opener to Texas, and then I think they will either drop one of the 3 road games they have in Washington, Illinois, or Michigan. I think they'll drop one of the 3. But I think Ohio State, they'll be perfectly fine. I think they'll be back in the playoff once again. I don't see any trouble with having to achieve that and be competitive in the Big Ten once again. My number 3 team, the Texas Longhorns, coming in at an over-under win total of 9.5. Biggest question mark I have, can Arch Manning get Steve Sarkisian over the hump and into the national championship? Obviously, they had Quinn Ewers and made it to the semifinals last year, but came up short against Ohio State. So will Arch Manning be the answer to get over the hump and get Texas into the national championship? A lot of O-line have been working with Manning on the second offense, as a backup. So he'll have a lot of experience with the guys that are protecting him in front. Headlined by DJ Campbell returning at offensive guard. So, but they did just lose their right tackle, Andre Kojo, to a season-ending injury. So they're already on their backup right tackle, which is not a good sign. And we're only 2 weeks into camp. So obviously already on your backup right tackle, but he'll have time to adjust and adapt and get up to speed. before that huge opener against Ohio State. Multi-talented running back room led by Quintravion Wisner returning. Wide receivers DeAndre Moore Jr. and Ryan Wingo. Return with the addition of Emmett Mosley, the fifth from Stanford, and Cal transfer Jack Endries looks to fill the shoes of star tight end Gunnar Helm on the offensive side. The interior defensive line got some portal hauls looking to regain the strength from 24. And sophomore Colin Simmons returns on the edge with interior linebacker Anthony Hill Jr. leading the defense. And the secondary should also be great again with Michael Taft returning, Jelani McDonald returning, Malik Muhammad returning, and Jalen Gilbo also returning. They could possibly be the best defense in the country, I have marked. But obviously their O-line continuity is the biggest question mark. DJ Campbell is the only returning starter. Andre Kojo went down with the season-ending injury. So a lot of question marks along that offensive line are ready to begin this, and we haven't even started the season yet. And the schedule has its bumps, but for the most part, it's relatively easy. They get that opener at Ohio State, which will be a huge test right off the bat. They go at Florida right before Red River against Oklahoma. So if they go to the Swamp, it could be a letdown. They're already looking ahead to Red River the next week. So there could be a letdown spot at Florida, but they go to Georgia off of a bye week, and then they have A&M at home to finish the season. So I'm leaning they're over 9.5 wins. I have Texas going 10-2. That Georgia game will be tough. Red River, anything can happen, especially if they're going into that Florida game and they're already overlooking Florida. But 10-2 is what I have Texas projected at going into the 2025 season, and they come in at number 3 in my preseason poll. Number 2, the Penn State Nittany Lions, an over-under of 10.5 wins. And can James Franklin do it? These are the questions. Can James Franklin do it? This is the best roster on paper he's had in his tenure at Penn State. So can he make a national championship? Can he make it back to a semifinal? Can he win a national championship? Can he win a big game? These are the questions. They return Drew Howard. They return Nick Singleton. They return Kaytron Allen. They return their entire offensive line from last season. They added Devontae Ross from Troy, Trevor Pena from Syracuse, and Kyron Hudson at receiver that will have to make it for the loss of Tyler Warren. They returned Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant on the D-line while also adding in star Zariah Fisher, who a lot of people have been talking about in camp. They add him to the mix to make up for Abdul Carter leaving. Linebackers Dom DeLuca and Tony Rojas are both back. Tony Rojas he's that dude. Tony Rojas. They also added Amari Campbell Jr., a talented freshman from North Carolina, into that linebacking core. They also returned A.J. Harris and Zakee Wheatley in the secondary to anchor the defense. And they potentially have the best coordinator duo in the country with Andy Kotelnicki and Jim Knowles, who they got from Ohio State. That's insane. They might have the best coordinator combo in the country. And my last note, they simply have a 5-game schedule. If they make out 3-2 in this 5-game stretch, I see them making the playoff. Again, they have 3 non-conference games, a bye week, and then they host Oregon in the whiteout. They go to Iowa, have a bye week, and then go to Ohio State. So those back-to-back games with a bye week sandwiched in between could definitely be a tough spot. They host Indiana, go at Michigan State, and then host Nebraska at the back end of the season. So Michigan State could be a letdown spot potentially if you're only thinking about Indiana and Nebraska on either side of that game. But Penn State, I'm leaning their under. That hurts. As growing up as a Penn State fan, I will be at every home game this season. Now I'm making this as unbiased as possible. I'm leaning their under. I have them going 10-2. I have them beating Oregon in the whiteout. I have them losing to Ohio State, and then they potentially could drop that Iowa game as well. But I also see them going 11-1. So 10-2, 11-1 in that range. I have them, dropping somewhere in that spot between Oregon, Iowa, and Ohio State. Iowa and Ohio State also on the road. So 11-1, 10-2. is my projection for Penn State. So leaning under, if I had to take a bet on that win total, I'm leaning under at 10-2. And finally, the number one team in the love for the game preseason top 25, the Clemson Tigers, with a over-under win total of 9.5. And can Dabo Swinney use his returning production, the most in the country, the most returning production in the country, to win the ACC and the national championship? They returned Cade Klubnik, 4 or 5 offensive line starters, TJ Moore at receiver, Bryant Westcott receiver. Their running backs will be headlined by a true freshman, Gideon Davis, and redshirt freshman David Mooney. Apologies if I mispronounced that. And they added Tristan Smith from Southeast Missouri State, who had 76 catches and 6 touchdowns last season. So never heard of him before, but one to watch out for, Tristan Smith. The defensive front stands out. Will Helt joined from Purdue. Finally, Dabo dabbled into the portal. Will Helt joins at defensive end from Purdue. They still have TJ Parker, Peter Woods, DeMonte Capehart. Yeah, that defensive line's nasty. Their secondary will also be great, with Avion Farrell, Ashton Hampton, Jaden Lucas make up that back end, and the linebackers will rotate to stay fresh with Wade Woodez, Sammy Brown, Jeremiah Alexander joining from Alabama, and Jamal Anderson. And their schedule, very favorable to ACC if you get over the hurdles. Obviously, LSU to open the season will be a tough game, and then their third game, they go on the road at Georgia Tech. So if they get through those 2 early hurdles, I believe they'll be very successful. They have at UNC, home to SMU, versus Duke at home, at Louisville, and at South Carolina. So I'm projecting Clemson either 11-1 or undefeated. That Georgia Tech game, I think, could be sneaky for them, especially, if they beat LSU and they have a cupcake in their second game. That Georgia Tech game could definitely be sneaky, I believe. But 11-1 or undefeated for Clemson, and they come in at number 1 in my preseason poll. So there you go. There is the full top 25, along with the teams on the outside. Let me know your thoughts. I'm open to discussion. Hit me up on X. That's where I'm most active, at LFTGpod01. Also on TikTok and Instagram. Try to be active on TikTok a lot as well. And again, want to give a shout out to our sponsor again, Squad Blitz. Really appreciate them supporting the program. Hit the link in the description below to go download Squad Blitz. And remember, under the referral section, click on Love for the Game. That supports the program, supports Squad Blitz. Really appreciate what they're doing. College fantasy football. Definitely gonna have to dabble in it for sure. But that will do it for me. Reed Napper signing out. Top 25. Let me know your thoughts. Appreciate it. Like, comment, and subscribe. And I will catch you guys later this week. Appreciate it. Thank you, guys.